Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Annie News. We've got some reincarnated as a slime stuff to check out. We're going to look into what's been left out, potentially missed out, in this labyrinth construction. Let's get into it.
If you've ever wondered how Ramiris holds the position that she does, this right here is the reason why. Imagine a reality marble and domain expansion combined together, all with little to no limitations whatsoever. Seriously, she's quite literally an omnipotent god who can do whatever she wants in this realm.
Okay,
the absolute ruler over a dimension of her own creation. This is the power behind one of the coolest things I've ever seen any isekai protagonist do, and it's a large part of what I want to talk about in this video here. So, in addition to the labyrinth and the details left out from its creation, here's Mazecraft and why it's one of the most OP skills out there.
Mazecraft. What a name, that's cool.
Mazecraft, the skill responsible for creating Tempest Labyrinth, and an ability so OP that even Rimuru is constantly shocked by what it can do.
So cool.
It was as soon as he understood the full scope of what it was capable of that he decidedly concluded, in terms of defense, Ramiris' Mazecraft couldn't be more superior. There was just so much power behind the ability to have unrestricted control over everything. Power that gets more ridiculous the more we talk about it.
Yeah.
So, what is it that Mazecraft does exactly? Well, it's an intrinsic skill that makes Ramiris the supreme god of any labyrinth she's created. It can be as big or as small as she wants, and anything within or even around it then becomes subject to her absolute authority. Anything alive and conscious she first requires their permission to, but anything non-living she can control any which way she wants.
Cool.
What this means is that, before gaining control over those which have a will of their own, they first need to understand what they're walking into is a labyrinth. Unless they acknowledge that this is what they're doing, Ramiris can refuse their entry and block anyone from traversing her labyrinth. It makes it so the people who enter are the people who want to, and by doing so they're effectively giving Ramiris that permission she requires. So, permission wasn't so much this formal contract, but rather the simple mindset of knowing what you were walking into.
Okay.
That being the case, you couldn't carry someone who was asleep into the labyrinth, since the person sleeping wouldn't know they were entering one.
Yeah, they're not like acknowledging where they're going, right? Okay.
If they were awake and you were trying to forcefully drag them in, Ramiris would simply resist and make it impossible. As for everyone else, it's the moment they take their first step in that they've essentially agreed to Ramiris' conditions and accepted her rule over them. They'd become subject to a fearsome authority that seemingly knows no boundaries. Sometimes that power could extend even beyond the labyrinth, since say there were adventurers simply hovering by the entrance, Ramiris could take their weapons and armor without them even giving her permission.
Oh.
If their equipment had consciousness, then that was a different story, but anything else was hers for the taking. So, if a power like that was available even outside her labyrinth, I'm sure you can imagine what it is she can do within. It's something Rimuru was curious to figure out himself, so he decided to go and ask her 5 follow-up questions. Questions we did already get answers to in the anime, but here's a summary and a bit of.
So how many floors can you build? How many days do you need? What kind of monsters are inside? Can you change the internal structure of will? What happens if someone dies? Oh, that's
extra info for them. There was virtually no limit to the number of floors Ramiris could make, and it didn't matter how wide or deep each of them went either, since so long as she had enough energy, Ramiris could create anything. The reason she kept it to 100 is because anything beyond that started to require exponentially greater sums of magic. It wasn't something she could reasonably sustain anymore. Monsters could be seeded with the right amount of magicules, and magicule density directly correlated to the monster's power level. It was this convenient property that made it possible to fine-tune the labyrinth's difficulty level. Then, with each floor taking an hour to build, the internal structure took about an hour to build as well. It was once that initial setup was completed, though, that more changes couldn't be made for another 24 hours. A complete day had to pass before any floor could be edited after their last revamping. These edits came with restrictions of their own, since organic matter wasn't something she could produce out of nothing. It made it so each floor was typically these uninspired mazes of similar-looking corridors, blank walls and nothing else. It was, however, easy enough to decorate, so that wasn't something Rimuru was particularly worried about. What he was with regards to the complete wizardry behind what happens when someone dies in her labyrinth. Rimuru didn't understand it himself, but whether it be a monster or human, so long as Ramaris was aware of it, she could revive anyone.
Veteran
It's the
god.
reason she requires their permission before entering, since by accepting her rules, it allows her to keep very close tabs on their
So she
status.
can keep track of everyone.
She
right,
didn't
okay.
like being responsible for other people's deaths, so in the past when some unlucky adventurer did die, she'd simply revive them then send them on their way again. It's exactly what she would have done had Rimuru lost to that golem all that time back. Reviving did require quite a bit of magic though, so in the case there was something like an entire party that got wiped, it was far easier to resurrect them using her revival equipment. They were special items that returned the dead alive outside the labyrinth, the basis for the bands we see her make later on in the anime. Fast forward now to the labyrinth's construction, and that's where we see firsthand the separation between the real world and the labyrinth dimension. Though exactly the same to how it was in the real world, the floor the beast folk now live on is on a completely separate dimensional space, one that is linked to the outside, so
Very cool.
a day-night cycle was already pre-established, and weather like rain can be produced whenever Ramaris wants. The rest of the floors aren't so livable, since that's the dungeon Rimuru is trying to make. As he describes it himself, what he wants to create is a real-time, real-life strategy game. A theme I'm sure we all picked up from the way that he designed it, but to properly confirm his intentions, this was what he was going for. A dungeon filled with loot that got harder the further you progressed it. I don't know about you,
Yeah, like a normal video game is how it usually plays.
but to me the whole thing seems pretty much like a roguelite. Especially when you consider how floors can be interchanged with each other and individual floors can be modified every 24 hours. Where Rimuru takes this one step further is the way that he uses Veldora to populate it.
Yeah.
You see, if Rimuru's the architect and Ramaris the builder, then Veldora's the power supply keeping everything running. It's his magicules which support everything that makes this labyrinth a dungeon.
It's funny, it's like, wait, I can go all out? Alright, raw!
The word Rimuru chose was actually Overlord, but that was just a cool sounding term to get Veldora interested. I also like to think it was the author making a reference. In any case, this wasn't so much about Veldora being the final boss, but was rather just a good excuse to get him to release his aura. Reason being that the only thing standing between Tempest and a mass casualty event was literally Veldora's willpower and nothing else. It was far too dangerous to stake so many lives on him alone. Like, had he lost control and released it anywhere even remotely close to Tempest, such a high concentration of magicules would kill anything below the B rank instantly.
Crazy.
And to Rimuru, that was pretty much everyone outside his personal administration. So, by having Veldora release it here in Ramaris' domain, the isolated space she'd created meant the magicules wouldn't leak at all. It was impossible for them to cross from the labyrinth dimension into the real world. This was shortly after all the floors were finally built, then it was after that that a lot of the more intricate details were worked out. Things like the block system which rearranged the order and format of floors, then save points every 10 floors which made use of Rimuru's spatial motion. These were literal checkpoints adventurers could always restart at, and they would be there for any person killed during their expedition. That or those who were returning to continue a previous one. Either way, death was a core part of the whole experience. Whether it was a boss being slain or the adventurers themselves, Ramaris' mazecraft could revive either.
Cool.
So long as they were a consenting part of her realm, she was pretty much free to do absolutely anything with them. Of course, that all changed if she herself was killed, but in a rare case like that, then everything would disappear.
Right.
Aside from that, any and all servants would get revived at a save point, and a servant was anyone with whom she'd forged a pact with. They were those who she simply agreed to the presence of. So, once again, Rimuru was blown away by just how powerful such a skill was, since it essentially made her and her minions invincible.
Yeah, it's class.
Sure, that only worked on those who were part of her world, but that alone was incredible regardless. It enhanced Beretta and Trainee to a level Rimuru couldn't even imagine. Trainee was already strong in the real world, but with that small minor addition of becoming immortal, Rimuru was sure that not even
Small addition.
Benimaru or Shion could beat her. That's just how game-changing such an attribute was. Now, automatic resurrection worked fine for Trainee and Beretta, but when it came to doing so for hundreds or thousands of people, to keep track of each simply wasn't possible. Remember, a person can only revive if Ramaris wants them to. If you stumbled into the labyrinth, died and Ramorous didn't know you died, then odds are you wouldn't be resurrected ever. So, in order to fix what was nothing more than a scaling problem, Ramorous went and created those bracelets we saw. Magical items that automatically imbued people with the immortal attribute. She had also created return whistles too, which, just like an escape rope, immediately returned adventurers to the surface.
Cool.
They were two items that were essentially just Ramorous's power in physical form. Power Rimuru wanted to replicate for himself, but to his displeasure unfortunately couldn't. Whatever it was that made Mazecraft intrinsic to Ramorous, it was unique to her and only her.
Only her, right.
Now, it's because a lot of the inner workings weren't yet set up that Veldora's Magicules could hit pretty much everywhere. The lack of walls and corridors meant the Magicules could reach every corner evenly. Then with ducts and stairways connecting each floor to the next, the Magicules could reach the floors above no problem. In fact, Veldora's Magicules were so incredibly dense and potent that at 50 floors up, the concentration of them was still higher than the deepest parts of the cave he was sealed in. So, if back there you'd find A-ranked Tempest serpents, I can only imagine what next level monsters would be created now. It was just a matter of time until some heavy-hitting juggernauts spawned. In any case, this was all beneficial to understanding the very nature of Magicules, since to have access to such a dense and constant supply, it opened up avenues for research that Rimuru had never even thought of before. It was turning out to be a much more vital asset than Rimuru had initially planned it to be, so much so that he didn't think Trainee alone was enough to protect it. This was partially why he gave Beretta to Ramorous, since to have her there too made Rimuru a lot more comfortable.
Fair enough. I mean, it made sense anyway.
She and Trainee were now these immortal servants, and they would reap the benefits of such even more than Ramorous herself. It was the start of what could very well be a terrifying path leading towards Ramorous's true potential. What I mean is that if two invincible powerhouses seemed intimidating already, then what would a potential army of thousands look like? It was a fearsome thought that Rimuru could only shudder at. The prime reason behind how he came to the conclusion that Mazecraft was the best defensive skill. Even if her ranks weren't that powerful individually, just having control over all of Veldora's monster spawn was more than enough to put quite a bit of respect on her name.
Yeah.
Even more so if they all possessed the immortal attribute. Why is it then that no one fears her like that? Well, that simply comes down to Ramorous being Ramorous. She could quite literally have limitless, infinite Tsukiyomi and Ultra Instinct, and I'm sure everyone would treat her exactly the same.
Oh, okay.
To them, she's just this tiny, lovable pixie. Not some evil overlord capable of commanding an unstoppable army of invincible monsters. Well, at least that's what Rimuru thinks anyway. It was after this that the floors started to be filled in, and it was about as daunting as you might think it was. I mean, when you have to build a maze within an area 800 feet side to side, it was only a matter of time before something like that got boring. Especially when you had to do it 99 times after.
Don't know what happened there. That was really weird. That threw me. Oh my god. But anyway.
For context on how big that actually is though, imagine a maze the size of Tokyo's baseball stadium, then imagine that repeated 99 times downward, getting smaller in an inverse pyramid formation.
Okay, cool.
That's the estimated space that Rimuru was dealing with here. If we were to look at floor 1 specifically though, this was best described as the demo area. A tease of what's to come below, and a level not so hard that beginners wouldn't be able to traverse it. Sure,
Yeah, you don't want to put them off straight away, do you? Jesus Christ.
it may still be slightly challenging, but with the hallways wide, passageways clear, and monsters weak, Rimuru made it very difficult to get stuck or lost anywhere. It was intended to ease adventurers into the adventure of it all and build excitement towards what to expect later. There was, however, the caveat of it being rather big, so Rimuru was worried people might spend time mapping the floor only to find nothing. To him, the worst case scenario was for people to start dissing the labyrinth without exploring further. A concern he hoped would be mitigated by monster drops and magic crystals. That beginner layout stayed the same all the way to floor 5, then on floor 6 and below is where things got trickier. Not enough that anyone should die, but it was here that some of the more simple traps would be introduced. To give you an idea of what some of these traps were, if it was possible to imagine, then Ramorous could create it. It was pretty much everything you'd expect in Elden Ring or a Dark Souls game. This included poison arrows in swamps, floors that both moved and rotated, bladed wires barely visible, pitfalls and mimics, exploding chests and magic traps, closed rooms, dark areas, narrow areas, and special areas. A lot of these weren't even that bad alone, but when combined together, it could make for quite the impossible scenarios. Interesting challenges of strength, agility, wit, and fortitude. For ones that tested your knowledge like the closed rooms, if you're wondering how that was even possible, well, in addition to being able to create any physical object she wants, Ramorous' magic can also control the air composition too. So, if Rimuru wanted a room that was limited in oxygen, the only thing he needed to do was ask.
Ask it and
like,
she can do
even
it.
now
Wow.
when they were 100 floors deep, Ramorous' power made the air here no different from how it was on the surface. It was another reminder of how crazy her macecraft skill is. So, these were the traps one could expect, but the more hard ones wouldn't appear until after floor 10. Floors 6 to 9 were still intended to ease everyone into it, since if the beginning was too hard, then people would be discouraged from trying again. Floor 10 was when the training wheels came off though, since the Guardian there was, in Rimuru's own words, kind of strong.
Cool.
He hadn't decided who exactly he was gonna put there yet, but it definitely wasn't going to be a pushover. The ideal candidate was a monster ranked around the B level. These floor bosses got special equipment of their own since the circumstances of their life was a bit different from the adventurers. You see, as unintelligent monsters not capable of understanding permission, every boss was given what's called a resurrection collar. It was an item that let the wearer be resurrected without having formed a pact with Ramorous. This was the perfect item to ensure the floor boss was always present, but when you really think about it, it's actually pretty messed up. Like, imagine coming to life then being forced to fight to the death over and over again.
Oh mate, that is a bit...
You can never escape the constant loop of death, because every time you do die, Ramorous just brings you back again. It's almost like a sick form of torture where not even death was an escape. That's just me thinking about it from the monster's perspective, but from a business side, it's more than perfect.
Oh yeah.
Aside from that, the fact Ramorous could bestow such power into items was a wonder in and of itself. It seems her skill lets her change the effects of any item she wants. But anyway, the boss room was the entirety of floor 10, which allowed for complete safety after the boss was defeated. Loot was rewarded randomly from a chest after, then a door would open leading to the next floor. It was after this that one could start to find hidden areas and chest traps, then so on and so forth as difficulty scaled with depth. By the end, the finished product was something far beyond ruthless. It was a level of difficulty that even Raphael found to be a bit much. When considering the skills of the average adventurer, the crafty traps and legion of upper-level monsters provided an experience that made Vicious seem tepid. There was a good chance that the later difficulty wasn't balanced at all, at least not for those who you would consider average. Now, the dragon bosses are something I actually want to talk about in a separate video, so aside from knowing that they reside in floors 96 to 99, the only other thing worth mentioning is the operational stuff, specifically the loot buyback system that Rimuru set in place for everyone. Since a guild outpost didn't exist yet in Tempest, Rimuru decided he was gonna set up one of his own. He didn't want people to have to travel to Blumend just to sell some gear. So what he did to prevent that was establish what was pretty much a pseudo-guild, a convenient place where adventurers could sell their rewards at a discount. It may not be standard market price, but if they didn't want to leave Tempest, then this was the only option they had.
Fair enough.
It was a clever way to cycle money back into the economy, all while making savings from the price differential. Other installments included in Labyrinth vendors, the bulk of which would either be basic food or healing potions, both obviously marked up due to their convenience. There were a few other business ideas Rimuru had as well, but that was the majority of what he implemented. So, all in all, this is probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen any isekai protagonist do. It's a feat that goes beyond just being powerful and extends further into a world of its own. I mean, it's as if Rimuru just created his own little Danmachi universe. It was pretty awesome to see something like this come to life, and I'm glad they did a deep dive into how they did it. I still think the Resurrection Collar is pretty diabolical, but aside from that, the logistics, business, and adventure are all just fun. It was an entertaining topic I thought you all might have wanted to know more about. But yeah, That's this week's deep dive into some more Tensura lore, and I'll be back next week with a certain character's power profile.
Cool.
Until then, don't forget to check out the slime-inspired Mugen teas. They'll be available for a limited time using the link down in the description. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So until next time,
ciao. Awesome. Yeah, the way he said that, like, it is pretty much like a Danmachi little universe he's made there. I like he's using Danmachi clips. I hope, like, are we getting a new season of Danmachi? Must do. So good. But anyway, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, I want to be able to watch Patreon-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series. Links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 month was the last help support channel. I greatly appreciate things for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys next time.